The office felt unusually heavy that morning, the kind of heaviness that settles on your shoulders before you even realize you're tired. Papers were stacked across my desk like small mountains waiting to be climbed, and the fluorescent lights hummed their familiar, emotionless tune. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee, more watery than comforting, and tried to convince myself that the day would be like any other. Routine, predictable, safe. But then my screen blinked. A soft ping. Not an email. A message from Theron. "Can you come into the conference room for a moment?" A simple request. Yet something in the wording made me pause. It carried a warmth, a softness that wasn't typical of office exchanges. My curiosity stirred before I could suppress it. Grabbing my notes more for comfort than necessity, I made my way down the quiet hallway. Each step felt louder than usual against the polished floor, like my anticipation had found a way to echo. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus cleaner, a scent that always struck me as oddly personal, almost intimate. Theron stood near the window, the late morning light brushing over the subtle silver strands in his hair. For a moment, he looked less like the composed executive everyone knew, and more like a man caught in a moment of quiet reflection. He turned when I entered, and the warmth in his eyes startled me. "Thanks for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. I sat, feeling a strange, soft pull in the air, a shift I couldn't quite name. He didn't reach for any folders or charts. Instead, he leaned gently against the edge of the table and let a deliberate silence settle between us, the kind that feels heavier than words. "I wanted to talk to you," he began, his voice low, almost confessional. I felt something in me tighten and soften all at once, not about the reports or deadlines. He continued, "I wanted to check in with you, personally." The words landed with unexpected weight. Recognition in the workplace usually came wrapped in formality, but this felt real. His gaze held a sincerity that warmed something inside me I hadn't even realized had grown cold. Without meaning to, I let my guard slip, the invisible armor I wore every day loosening at the edges. We talked not about numbers, but about life, about the quiet victories we often ignore, the frustrations we hide, the human parts of ourselves that rarely make it past the office door. With every shared moment, the room felt smaller, softer, almost like a space that existed just for us. By the time I returned to my desk, the day felt different, lighter. There was a warmth in my chest that refused to fade, and I caught myself smiling at nothing at all. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't reckless, it was simply human. And that afternoon, when his assistant approached my desk with another message, my pulse betrayed me. "He'd like to see you in the conference room again if you have a few minutes." I tried to steady myself as I walked. Foolishly, I thought I had imagined the earlier connection, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I hadn't. The sunlight had shifted into golden streaks across the table, and Theron looked up with a softness that made the room feel warmer than the rest of the office ever could. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," he said, and something in his tone felt both gentle and intentional. "No, of course not," I replied, taking my seat. We spoke again, and this time the conversation flowed easier, naturally, openly. He told me about a painting he had been working on, and the image of this meticulous, composed man struggling with a stubborn brushstroke pulled a laugh from me before I could hold it back. His eyes warmed at the sound. There was something quietly compelling in the air, something neither professional nor casual, something personal. And as I left the room later, the warmth followed me like sunlight lingering on my skin long after I'd stepped back into the dim, humming office. Whatever this was, it had only just begun. Something in me knew that, and something in him did too. But neither of us said it, not yet. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness, the kind that makes you pause before stepping fully into the day. As I walked into the office, I realized I was scanning the space before I even admitted to myself what I was looking for. The quiet hum of conversations drifted around me, But something felt different, like the air carried a subtle current I couldn't quite explain. I found myself thinking about Theron more than I expected. Not dramatically, not in a way that startled me, but as a soft echo in the back of my mind. The warmth of his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, the gentleness that seemed to bloom between us so effortlessly, it all lingered with me longer than I intended. I tried to focus on my work, diving into a stubborn spreadsheet that demanded more patience than I had. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the soft golden light of the conference room and the easy flow of our conversation. I didn't want to read too much into it, yet every part of me knew something had shifted. And then it happened again. A message. From him. "If you have a few minutes, can you come in? I think today's a good day for a chat." My heart responded before my mind could reason with it. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something deeper that neither of us fully understood yet. The conference room felt warmer than usual that day. The morning light filtered through the blinds in soft, golden stripes, touching everything with a kind of quiet tenderness. The familiar scent of citrus cleaner mingled with the hint of freshly brewed coffee, grounding the moment in something strangely soothing. Theron stood by the window again, hands loosely clasped, shoulders relaxed. When he turned toward me, his expression was open, almost inviting. "Thanks for coming," he said softly. "I thought we could continue where we left off." I took a seat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It felt like a pause charged with awareness, like we were both adjusting to the unspoken closeness that was slowly forming. The conversation began simply small stories about our mornings, small frustrations, small joys, but soon it deepened. He shared pieces of his past, memories that held softness and honesty. I found myself opening up too, offering fragments of myself I usually kept tucked away. There was something different about the way he listened. Theron didn't just hear my words, he absorbed them. His attention never wavered, his eyes steady and warm, his nods gentle and encouraging. It created a space where I felt safe, understood, seen in ways I hadn't experienced in a long time. At one point, the conversation drifted into silence, not uncomfortable, but meaningful. The city murmur outside filled the room with a soft backdrop. I noticed the way his sleeve brushed the table when he shifted, the way the sunlight caught the silver in his hair, turning it almost golden, the way his breath seemed just a little deeper when he looked at me. He broke the silence with a quiet honesty. "I don't often say this," he said, his voice low and steady, "but I really value our conversations, more than I can put into words." Those words sank into me slowly, warming from the inside out. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a boundary-crossing statement. It was something else, something real, sincere, and undeniably human. "I feel the same," I said softly, the truth settling between us like a fragile but undeniable bridge. The room felt smaller then, not confined but intimate. The world outside seemed to blur, leaving only the two of us in that quiet moment, breathing the same warm air, holding on to the same gentle understanding. When our conversation finally drifted to an end, I felt a strange combination of calm and anticipation. Leaving the conference room felt like stepping out of a warm cocoon into colder air. The office hallway seemed longer, the fluorescent hum sharper, the outside world louder than before, but the warmth stayed with me. Not on my skin but somewhere inside, steady and warm, like a soft flame that refused to go out, and deep down, I knew it wasn't just the comfort of being understood. It was the beginning of something neither of us had dared to name yet, something that was quietly growing between us, one moment at a time. The following day carried a kind of quiet electricity, the subtle kind that hums beneath the surface without drawing attention to itself. I tried convincing myself it was just another morning, but I couldn't ignore how my thoughts kept circling back to Theron, to the easy tenderness in his voice, the way he listened, the warmth in his eyes. That lingered long after our conversations ended. I had barely settled at my desk when another message appeared on my screen. If you have a moment, could you come in? Feels like a good day for another chat. My breath stilled for just a second. It wasn't fear. It wasn't uncertainty. It was anticipation, gentle, warm, unmistakable. The conference room greeting me that morning felt different from every other day I had known it. The blinds cut the sunlight into gentle stripes that stretched across the polished table. The citrus scent in the air mingled with the faint aroma of coffee, making the space feel unexpectedly inviting. Theron stood near the window again. This time, when he turned toward me, the softness in his expression wasn't fleeting, it was steady, like he had been waiting for this moment. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. I sat, and the silence that settled between us felt warm, not empty. It was a pause that belonged to us, a space where neither of us rushed, where the unspoken connection grew quietly, naturally. We began talking the way two people do when they trust each other without fully realizing when that trust began. He shared pieces of his childhood memories of quiet mornings, lessons learned from days that once felt heavy but had shaped him in ways he was still understanding. I found myself sharing too, offering bits of my past, pieces I rarely gave anyone. There was no judgment in him, no comparisons or assumptions, just presence, just attention. Just a man seeing a woman beyond her title, beyond her performance, beyond what the office expected her to be. At one point, I caught him watching me with a softness that made something flutter in my chest. Not romantic in a reckless way, not suggestive, but deeply human, like he was memorizing the way I existed in that moment. "You have a way of noticing things," he said softly. "A way of seeing the world that most people overlook." The sincerity in his tone settled over me like a warm blanket. I wasn't used to being noticed like that, not for productivity, not for efficiency, but for presence. I felt something inside me loosen, something that had been wound tight for far too long. We sat there for what felt like minutes, but could have been hours. The city hummed faintly outside the window, but inside the room it was peaceful, grounded, almost sacred in its quietness. When our conversation drifted into silence, I noticed small details again, the way the sunlight touched the silver in his hair, the slight crease in the leather chair where he sat, the subtle scent of his cologne that brushed the air when he leaned forward. He looked at me then, and his voice was almost a whisper. "I don't want to overstep," he began, "but I value you, not just as an employee, but as a person." My breath caught. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't unprofessional. It was honest, transparent. A moment of truth between two people who had crossed no lines, but had stepped into a kind of emotional closeness that felt both unexpected and deeply comforting. "Thank you," I whispered back, my voice softer than I intended. His eyes softened. Mine did too. There was no rush after that, no dramatic shift, just a deeper understanding, a deeper warmth, a deeper sense that something gentle and real was unfolding between us with every shared breath. When I finally left the conference room, the hallway felt colder, the lights harsher, the world louder, but I carried a calmness with me, a steady sense of connection that made the day feel changed, not in a bold, life-upending way, but in the way that matters quietly, deeply. By the time I sat back at my desk and looked out over the office floor, I realized something undeniable. This connection wasn't accidental. It wasn't fleeting. It wasn't a passing spark. It was growing carefully, naturally, beautifully. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself looking forward to whatever came next, even if neither of us was ready to name it yet. That afternoon carried a softness I couldn't quite explain, as if the day itself sensed something shifting beneath the surface. The office was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel intentional, the distant tapping of keyboards, the faint hum of printers, the gentle sigh of someone settling into their chair. But beneath all of it, an anticipation pulsed inside me, steady and warm. When the message came from Theron, it felt almost inevitable. "If you're free, could we talk for a moment? Not urgent, not formal, just an invitation, one that felt familiar and unexpectedly comforting. The walk to the conference room felt different this time, slower, more aware. The hallway lights cast long reflections against the polished floor, and my footsteps echoed softly, as if the space itself understood the significance of what waited ahead. When I entered, the room was bathed in a soft, golden glow. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, dust motes drifting lazily in the warm beams. It felt cinematic, quietly beautiful, impossibly gentle. And there he was, seated at the head of the table, his expression softening the moment he looked up and saw me. "Come in," he said, his voice warm, almost relieved. "I'm glad you're here." I took my seat across from him, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. No tension, no awkwardness. Just a quiet understanding, like we were both stepping into a moment neither of us had planned for, yet both felt drawn to. We talked again, not about deadlines, not about projects, but about life, the choices that shaped us, the small joys that held meaning, the fears we rarely voiced. With every word, the room felt smaller, the distance between us softer, the air warmer somehow. His questions weren't probing. They were gentle, thoughtful, meant to understand rather than evaluate. And for reasons I couldn't fully articulate, I found myself answering honestly, completely. At one point, he leaned forward, the sunlight catching his hair in that familiar way silver strands illuminated like threads of warmth. His eyes held mine with a kind of sincerity that unraveled something deep inside me. "I hope this doesn't feel too forward," he said softly. "But I value you more deeply than I expected, more than I usually allow myself to." My breath faltered, not from shock, but from recognition, because I had felt it too, quietly, growing between us in every shared moment, every silence that held meaning, every softening of his voice when he spoke to me. "It doesn't feel forward," I replied. "It feels honest." His shoulders eased, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the polished table. The world outside moved on, unaware that somewhere inside this quiet room, two people were navigating an unspoken current that neither of them wanted to deny anymore. "I think it's rare," he said gently, "to find someone you can connect with like this, someone you can talk to without holding back." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into my chest. "It is rare." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, warm, suspended between us like a breath held just a moment too long. There was no rush to fill it, no pressure to define it, just an understanding that what we shared was real, delicate, and quietly powerful. When we finally rose from our seats, the room felt different, as if it had held something sacred, a conversation that shifted the shape of our days, the rhythm of our thoughts, the quiet spaces inside us we rarely shared. We walked to the door together, and just before leaving, he paused. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His voice alone held the weight of the moment. "I'm really glad we had this time," he said. "So am I breathed. We exchanged a look that carried more meaning than any admission could, a look that promised understanding, respect, and something unspoken but undeniably present. When I returned to my desk, the office noise faded into the background, replaced by a quiet clarity settling inside me. I realized then that life's most meaningful shifts aren't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they're small, tender, woven into ordinary days. That evening, as I stepped outside into the cool air, the city lights shimmered around me, bright against the darkening sky. I walked home with a soft certainty in my chest, a sense that something inside me had changed, not abruptly, not recklessly, but deeply. What grew between us wasn't rushed, wasn't forced. It was honest, human, a connection born in the quiet moments we allowed ourselves to notice. And as the night settled over the city, I understood something simple and profound. Sometimes the most beautiful connections arrive quietly, and all you have to do is let them in. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more real stories to life.